Hello and welcome to another episode of Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics with me, Oddworld Inhabitant, as your host. Now, over the last few videos of the series, we've been looking at how to make Imperial Guard competitive, what you really need to do, how your mindset needs to change as a Guard player. We've been I've been explaining this whole idea that, it's all about your infantry now. Back in 5th edition and the older editions, it was all about your tanks, but these days with D weapons being everywhere, haywire being everywhere, and generally vehicles just not being that hard to kill, this is the age of the monstrous creature. I've explained why Imperial Guard infantry are now the key component of your army. But an issue that the Imperial Guard has as a whole, but you'll especially find if you do start going down the route of pure infantry, but an issue that the Imperial Guard has as a whole is mobility. We're generally considered quite a slow army. This is represented in our fluff, the hammer of the Emperor grinding its foes down, and I guess in a nice sort of way, this does translate well onto the tabletop. Our tanks are ponderous, our assaults are generally, our fences are generally wide and slow. It's represented well in the fluff, and it's represented well in the tabletop. But this can cause problems from a competitive standpoint. Obviously, you need to be able to get from A to B. You need to be able to get onto those objectives, claim that Linebreaker. So the two things I'm going to look at, well, maybe more than two, but the two things I'm going to focus on is how do we make our infantry more mobile? And two, how do we go for that all-important Linebreaker point? Because whilst Linebreaker for many is just considered a tertiary point, it's not really that important. I can't tell you the number of times that, that one point, that Linebreaker point has tipped it in my favour for Maelstrom objectives, or not for Maelstrom, but for victory points at the end of the tournament game. It'll be really close out. My opponent will probably have more kill points, but I'll have more objective points. It'll come down to tertiary, and hopefully I'll have Linebreaker, and maybe my opponent has First Blood, but hopefully if I have First Blood and Linebreaker, that generally does mean I win. So we'll start with the first point: general Imperial Guard mobility. How do we get our guys from A to B? Because, well, the first thing we'll talk about is the problem that we have, and then we have to talk about how we solve it. So the problem is that Imperial Guard infantry are only going to move anywhere at a top speed of 6 inches a turn. Now, 6 inches a turn isn't too bad, but when you factor in that you take casualties from the front, so you're going to be getting blown back 2 to 3 inches a turn, you're realistically looking at you're only really moving up the field 3 inches a turn. With not, that's a generalization, that's a worst case scenario. If you're facing something like a Tau gun line, you are only going to be getting up the board 3 inches a turn. You'll be lucky. I faced, if you face Riptide Wing and you face 9 Riptides, you're going to be moving up 6 inches, getting blown back 6 inches. You're going to be going nowhere fast. I mean, it's possible to do it, but so how do we compensate for this issue of relatively slow mobility? Well, let's say you're taking a pure infantry force, or at least a very heavily infantry-based force. You're going to have such a massive footprint on the board that you can spread out across your whole deployment zone. Now, with a lot of horde armies, this would be an issue because you would struggle to bring force concentration to a certain point in the map. Say if you were orcs and you had green tide and you spread out across the whole deployment zone, you would have a big footprint, but a lot of the game turns your units wouldn't be doing anything because you're an assault based army. So if you're facing something like some sort of Death Star unit that wants to come up and roll up, it'll just roll up one flank and you'll never be able to bring enough force concentration against it. Fortunately, as the Imperial Guard, and I mentioned this in an earlier video, we're a very different kind of horde army. We're a shooting horde army. It's completely unique in the whole of 40k. We're a completely shooting horde army, which means it doesn't really matter if our opponent chooses one flank or the other. generally speaking, we're going to be able to hit him with our guns every single turn. Doesn't really matter. Maybe a few lasguns will be our range. If you've got a 200-man army, maybe 30, 40 lasguns will be out of range. But in the grand scheme of things, that's nothing in comparison to 90% of your army being unable to do anything because it's Death Stars rolling up one flank and you're an Orc player. So we can spread out across our whole deployment zone, and this isn't going to disadvantage us too much. And then what you do is it's like a World War I sort of strategy. You advance the whole line. Now your opponent is going to be not able to shoot your whole line. Even Tower will struggle, but they're not going to shoot your whole line so that you don't make any advances. So what you'll tend to find is you're advancing every turn you're moving your 6 inches. But then some units are getting blown back 3 inches, but some units aren't. Some units are making that 6 inches every single turn. And so you do this every single turn. I cannot stress, you move forward every single turn. You push forward. You make that grand sweeping offensive. World War I style, over the top, boys. Squad after squad, company after company of troops. You keep pushing forward. And what you'll find, and it's quite cinematic, but it does translate onto the tabletop, is where your opponent is most greatly concentrated, where he's focusing on his firepower, that part of the line will generally advance quite slowly. But the other areas, let's say it's your opponent's castled up on the left flank. Your left flank's going to struggle, but you're still going to push forward because you're putting pressure on the enemy. You'll then find that your middle and right flank will make quite good advances and will sweep round, and you'll actually sort of pin your opponent in his area because you've got such wide footprint that he can't physically break through your lines. So that's how it's quite literally you attack along an extended front, and where your opponent is unable to shoot you back those 3 inches, you just envelop him, you surround him, and at the same time what you're doing is you're establishing permanent board control. Because think about it this way, let's say the six objectives are on the board, they're all roughly evenly spread out around the center line. Your opponent will probably put 1 or 2 in his backfield, but if it's a tournament, you don't know which side you're on. So the objectives are fairly evenly spread out. If your opponent is shooting at one part of your army because it's coming straight at him, then what's happening at the same time is he's sort of securing those 2 or 3 objectives. So I say, really 1 or 2 objectives in that area of the battlefield. At the same time, in the other 60, 70% of the table, you're just pushing forward. And by turn 3, you moved 18 inches minimum with the parts of your army that aren't being heavily affected. Maybe there's been some scattered firepower thrown at them, but they're not too much. And what happens is, you'll find by turn 3, hang on, I'm sitting on 3 objectives here. And let's say there's 6 objectives in the game, I'm sitting on 3 objectives here. These 3 are now guaranteed to be mine. I've got 40 men sitting on each one. Minimum 30 men sitting on each one. Or my men are objective secured. It's a tournament, you're probably facing formation, so they're probably not obsec. But my opponent now has to shift off 30 guys off each one of these objectives minimum. Meanwhile, I'm attacking his 2 to 3 objectives that we're fighting over. So what you'll find is at the end of the game, and I tell you what, this happens to me all the time, you're sat comfortably on 3 objectives. And then you're contesting 2 objectives, and your opponent's just got 1. And so you've won by a long way. So that's how you solve this mobility issue. You are pseudo mobile because mobility in 40k is often used. Let's say you're an Eldar player. You've got your jet bikes, or or a Dark Eldar player, or anyone that can do, or Space Marines with bikes, or any kind of transport or vehicle. What you'll tend to find is your opponents will sit back, they'll shoot at you, they'll pick away at you, and then they'll go for this last turn objective grab. How many times have we heard it? Oh, I want to go second so I can have the last turn. They want to have the last turn so that they can take all the objectives. And what they'll try and do, and even Death Stars do it. Take Wolfstar, for example. It munches on your face for 3 turns, but then turns 4 and 5, it splits off into lots of little bits, and it goes for the end of game objective rush. Okay, what happens when Wolfstar's been munching on? Let's say you've got, if it's 1850 points, I'm running 250 guides. Wolfstars has been munching on 100 conscripts for turn 3 and 4. Suddenly, for turns 1 to 3, maybe turns 1 to 4. Suddenly, it gets to turn 4 and 5, and the Wolfstar player's like, okay, I better split off and go for these other objectives now. He does that. Suddenly, he's finding he's got 30, 40 guardsmen on all the objectives that he's been trying to go for. So, with guard mobility, you really have to plan ahead. And at the beginning of the game, you're almost saying to yourself, these 40 men are going to go to that objective, and when they get there, they're going to set up shop, and that's going to be my objective to the end of the game. And these 40 guys are going to go to do it to that objective, and these 30 guys are going to go to do it to that objective. Now, that's half my army going for objectives. The other half of my army is the distraction. The other half of my army is the cannon fodder. They're literally 50% of your army is like expendable losses that are just there to keep your enemy busy. So he wakes up on turn 5 and finds that he's got 30 guardsmen on every objective secured. So this is a bit of a mix. I'm talking about mobility here, but I'm also talking about general sort of objective-based strategy. So that's your way of thinking. If you've only got 6 inches a turn, you can't do what other players do. You can't wait for the last turn before it to rush onto everything. You've got to think turn 1. This is where I'm going. You got not even turn 1. You got to think deployment phase. I'm deploying my men so that these 30 are going here, these 30 are going here, and these 30 are going here, and they're going to take objective A, B, and C. And then I'm going to spend all my other guys are going to go forward and contest. Okay, so that's one part of it. Now, there are certain ways. Sometimes you need to do a last-minute objective rush. Sometimes you just got to do it. Now, some advice I'd give here, there are 2 orders. Or sometimes you just need, not just an objective rush, but sometimes you just need to go. You just need to move a bit further. You've been moving your 6 every turn, and it's not quite cut it. There's 2 ways you can get that extra speed boost, and they're both done with orders. Okay, now the 2 orders that you're going to want to use are they're both junior officer orders, which is great because it means your platoon command squads, if they're still alive, can issue them, and that frees up orders, your company command squad to issue the important orders, bring it down and find my target. But the 2 orders I'm talking about here are move, 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 which is a pretty well-known order, and forwards for the Emperor, which is less well-known. I've not seen any of the guard players around my area use it, but it's actually very good. So move, move, move is very simple. You take a leadership check, and then you're allowed to run. But you roll 3d6 and pick the highest for your run move. The number of times that this has guaranteed me a 6, because I always end up getting like a 1 and then a 2 and then a 6 or 5 or 6. Move, move, move is really good. Okay. And the second order you use is forwards to the Emperor. Now a lot of people don't really know about forwards to the Emperor, but what it does is it allows you to basically get Eldar battle focus. And what happens is you make a shooting attack, and then you immediately after that shooting attack you're allowed to run. So if that will probably get you an extra 2 or 3 inches every turn. So if you're not, if you don't have any bring it down orders left, or if you don't have any fire my target orders left, your company command squads are either dead or whatever, or or they've used other orders on other things. But you want to, there's no reason not to use bring it down. There's no reason not to use forwards to the Emperor. If you're shooting at, let's say there's a vehicle in front of you, and you don't have bring it down as an option. There's no reason for you not to use forwards for the Emperor. Think about it. You're not going to be using first rank fire, second rank fire, because the lasguns aren't going to help against that vehicle. So why wouldn't you accept that free run move? It's a little trick, But coming back to move, move, move. Move is very good because it comes as it leads us into the second part of this video I was talking about, which is how do we get that all important line breaker? Okay, now move is really important because it's part of my go-to strategy when it comes to getting line breaker. And the first part of the strategy is, and I've mentioned this before, let's say you've got your 3 or 4 platoons and you've got 40 men in each platoon. You don't have to put all 40 men into one blob together. What I actually like to do is to have 30 men and then 10 men and then 30 men and then 10 men and then 30 men and then 10 men. Because those 30 men, they're the ones that are going to be doing a lot of the damage. And they're the ones that are going to be drawing most of the attention. And meanwhile, you're going to have your platoon command squad and you're going to have this other 10-man squad. And their job is just to move forward every turn, but not draw any attention to themselves. Most of the time, your opponent, if he sees 10 guardsmen running at him, he's not really going to give a shit about it. He's going to give a shit about the 30 guards which are shooting him every single turn. So you use these like sneaky forces, and you put a platoon command squad and an infantry squad on each flank, on your left flank and on your right flank. And you just shoot them up the board. Every turn they move, every turn they run. You just send them up the board. So you've got 4 units going for Linebreaker just that way. And the other thing you can do to almost guarantees of Linebreaker is to take some Scout Sentinels or Rattlings, but I prefer Scout Sentinels. Because Scout Sentinels have, unsurprisingly, the Scout Special rule. And what this means is that they can outflank. So if you take 3 Scout Sentinels as individual units, you get 3 opportunities to outflank. And what you do is you just put them in your opponent's corner, and in somewhere in his deployment zone. He's not where he isn't at. Just somewhere in his deployment zone. Hide it in some cover. Keep it out of line of sight. Suddenly, your opponent, who has been blasting away at the 3 or 4 40-man blobs, because sometimes I like 50-man platoons, but I'd just put 10 to one side and have a 40-man blob, or 40 conscripts, for example. But your opponent has been blasting away. You've got 200 guys in your army. He's been blasting away at the 150 that have actually been shooting at him and damaging him and coming at him directly. Guess to turn 5, he's not going to get Linebreaker from you because he's not going to be able to physically break through your lines. And if he's drop pod, you've spread out your whole deployment zone. He can't drop pod in to claim Linebreaker. He's got to go in front of your deployment zone. But anyway, so you've been putting pressure on him. You've hopefully it's turn 4, turn 5. You've broken out of, if he's come straight at you, then you've broken out of that and you're making gains towards his deployment zone. If he's stood back and shot, you're finally going to be turn 4, 5. You're going to be making it to him. Suddenly, not only has he got units in his face, and he's thinking, shit, it's going to come down to tertiaries. He looks around. Wow, what tertiaries can I get? Linebreaker. Oh, I can't get that. How do I stop my opponent from getting Linebreaker? Well, he's going to look around and go, holy fuck, there's 3 Sentinels in my backfield. And then there's 4 units in my backfield. What the hell am I going to do? So that's how you get it. So you get Linebreaker with this mix of, you've got your Sentinels outflanking, and you've got your men running up the flank. So that's really, as a foot guard player, how I like to do mobility. Now these principles can be applied to any guard army, because think about it, the traditional guard army, you're looking at chimeras and platoons and Lehman Russes and artillery. But what you're going to do, all those units can only really move forward 6 inches a turn. Lehman Russes can only move forward 6 inches. Artillery shouldn't be moving at all. Chimeras can move 12 inches, but they're not getting anywhere. They're not doing any shooting. And infantry can only move 6 inches. The same principles apply. You want to try and spread out and advance across the line. Okay. So with Imperial Guard, just to summarize, it's all about, I think there's an actual line in one of the old Guard codex saying, if you have superior numbers, fight along an extended front. If your opponent matches you, then you will be able to break through his overextended lines and push your reserves through. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So just to sum up, just in summary, Imperial Guard mobility isn't based on pure mobility. You're not going anywhere faster than 6 inches a turn most of the time. But what you've got to do is you've got to plan ahead. You can use your orders to give you a little speed boost here and there, but most of the time you've got to plan ahead, and your mobility is all about your board control, your footprint on the board. And you've got to advance every single turn. You can't sit back and shoot. You've got to advance every single turn. Okay? So that's where it all comes from. So, because I'm not, if you're watching this video expecting me to say, oh, by the way, there's a magical way of making your guardsmen go 18 inches. We all know there's no way of doing that. But it's how do you compensate for your lack of mobility? And the way you do that, forward thinking and planning. Okay? So like I said, just summary, if the best bit of advice I can give you actually, I've already summarized, best bit of advice I can give you in this video is almost plan your whole game or how you want the game to go in your deployment phase. All right. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.